Welcome to the Talking Risk podcast. We discuss all things risk, hazard mitigation, insurtech, industry insights, and more. I'm your host, Brian Harris, Risk Control Director with FCCI Insurance Group, and with me is Ralph Hines, Risk Control Specialist with FCCI Insurance Group. Welcome back for another episode of Talking Risk. Today, our guest is Tony Williams, Supervisor in our Agribusiness Risk Control Unit. Tony, welcome to the podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank y'all for having me.
Tell us a little bit about FCCI's agribusiness operation before we get rolling on safety items here, because Ralph and I mostly cover safety and risk management stuff related to what we do, construction, manufacturing, etc. A lot of people don't know FCCI has a large agribusiness division. We write a lot of farm insurance. So tell us a little bit about the agribusiness side before we get rolling here.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, it's not just kind of farm insurance that we write. We have an appetite for other ag-related businesses, such as crop services, farm supply operations. This would include fertilizer, chemical dealers. We also like to look at feed mills, peanut operations, seed dealers, and some grower packer shippers. So we're pretty experienced in a lot of the ag industry. A lot of our underwriters, as well as risk control, come from that world. So we practice what we preach really over here at FCCI Ag.
Good deal. And Tony, your team basically is spread throughout FCCI's footprint of 20 or so states. So you've got people basically almost, across a variety of states, and they're out visiting our customers and providing risk control services to that group.
Correct. Correct. Yes. Kind of part of the FCCI promise is we have that local presence. So we have consultants out in the field that can relatively get to a lot of our accounts relatively quickly, and help them with their risk management program development, as well as offering a large assortment of services.
So we've got a list of things that we're going to cover today that are relevant safety issues for agribusiness risk control, things that are somewhat on your list of things to focus on when you and your people are out in the field. Ralph and I are going to go back and forth, and we'll touch on these things. So Ralph Hines, our specialist extraordinaire, is with us today as well, and he's got the first one. So Ralph, why don't you tee Tony up here?
Oh, will do. First of all, good morning and welcome to the Talking Risk podcast, Tony. We're excited to learn more about Risk Control Ag and what you guys do. And we're very thankful for you also. We have a saying, we're just thankful for what you do and what you're going to do. So I just wanted to thank you. So, hey, confined space, a big exposure in construction and general industry. And I believe it's just as serious in ag. Can you talk a little bit about confined spaces and grain bins and some of the exposures you all are evaluating out in the field?
Absolutely. So, if you remember there briefly when we were talking about kind of some of the what our appetite is over here at FCCI Ag, a lot of those operations will have grain bins and grain bin storage. And what comes with that is the ultimate grain bin engulfment and entrapment exposure that gets associated with those when we have employees actually having to get inside of those bins. So the latest numbers that I have found, and this is actually from 2022, there were 42 total grain entrapments over the course of 2022. That is actually a 45% increase from 2021. So this is an exposure that is actually increasing across the industry. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up is, of those entrapments, about 50% of those actually just occur on farms, not just commercial grain operations. So These are occurring on row crop operations, these family-run businesses that we're having these accidents. And what needs to be known is the fatality rate associated with these entrapments is about 36%. And so this is a big concern with us. This is something that my team does like to focus on when we go out there, when we ask about how they monitor, how they take care of their grain while it's in storage, because how they take care of their grain can actually lead to possibly some of those the exposures increasing, if you will, because there's basically three types of ways that we can have an employee or someone get trapped in one of those grain bins. First and foremost, and this is the number one reason for those entrapments, is free flowing grain. So this is basically somebody getting in a grain bin while we are trying to unload it. So you have free grain moving at this time. Think of it in that way as quicksand. This is a big no-no. So when we're out there and this comes up, we immediately stop and say, look, guys, we do not want this. This is a big concern. Please don't do this. The another way is kind of from a avalanche scenario, if you will, where basically out of condition grain. So this could be grain that it was put in storage too wet, or if we had a roof leak, things of that nature, actually kind of encrusted on the sides, or we have mounds building up within the grain bins. And you have an employee get in there and start to try to chip away at it so that they can get it loose enough that it'll get pulled out from the floor auger so that they can load it in trucks and get it going. Well, what happens is they get it too loose and ultimately it will collapse on top of the employee. That's another real big way that we have issues. And then another is called bridging. So again, this is out of condition grain that where an employee may get inside of a bin, they start walking over some of this grain that's out of condition and is almost crusted across the top. And as they're walking, that crust breaks away to a cavern that's below them. And as they fall in, the grain comes in there with them. So this is a big concern. This is something that we really focus on when we go out with our teams to talk to a lot of our insureds who have this type of exposure. And if they do have to get inside of the bins, we always want to make sure that it is kind of a buddy system, that they have the appropriate PPE to get in there safely. So this could be a harness and a lifeline so that if some reason they were to kind of fall, it's going to catch them, because the statistics show that within 4 seconds, you're going to sink up to about your knees. Within 20 seconds, you're fully engulfed. And at that point in time, you're having to call first responders out there to come and help. And time is of the essence in these situations because of how much the grain restricts our airflow when we get stuck in there. So it is very important, and again, something that we speak with a lot of our accounts, and we push them to try to find out with their local fire department is, are those firemen trained on grain entrapment rescue, and do they have the appropriate safety devices to actually be able to get in there and try to save some of those workers who may get trapped?
Ooh, that could be scary. Hey, we have a similar exposure in construction when we're talking about trenching and suffocation or engulfment. What's the weight of soil compared to well, I know the weight of soil. How does it compare to grain? Is grain heavy, or is it just that it moves so much that you're stuck?
If I'm not mistaken, it's something that once you're fully engulfed, it's basically two times your body weight
Hmm.
pressing in on yourself, trying to get out. So there's no real way for you to kind of pull yourself out or someone to come in there and pull you out. What they have to do in the devices that they use, basically, if you will, almost look like a trash can, but they're in four sections, they're in quarters. So you're able to go in and place them around the worker. And then you're going to bring a vacuum in there essentially and vacuum out the grain in sections so that we can get to it and we can release some of that pressure to the point that we are actually able to bring that worker out.
Hmm.
It's a significant exposure, and just like Ralph had mentioned on the construction side, it can happen fast, right? Whether you're in a grain bin or you're in a trench on a job site, those kind of hazards can happen so quick. And just like we hear on the commercial side, oh well, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm just going to be in there for a minute, right? I'm just going to go down there in there to do something to get this clog unstuck or whatever, and that's when it strikes. So take those proper precautions and be prepared and plan the work your plan, right?
That's right.
Look, it's a big enough concern that the every year there's a national week just devoted to grain bin safety, and it's the last week in February of every year. So I would recommend everybody going out there doing some research, try to participate in that. As I mentioned above, in 2022, that was the highest number of incidents in the last decade. So this is something that unfortunately seems to be increasing over time. And so we need to bring the information and the awareness out there to help prevent future losses.
This is Talking Risk, the risk control podcast from FCCI Insurance Group. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or by visiting our website, fcci-group.com. Click on Risk Control, then Risk Control Resources, and select the episode you want to hear. Tony, the next thing that we'll touch on is H2A transportation issues. What is that, and why is it a focus for you?
So with H2A transportation, I don't want to just hone in on the H2A workers, which would be some foreign workers that we use typically in the agricultural world, but more looking at it as just general fleet safety for the ag world, if you will. And the reason I kind of mentioned the H2A workers is because that's where the industry is moving. A lot of our row crop operations are starting to use more and more H2A workers. So again, foreign seasonal workers. So the reason that this is an exposure is they are coming from other countries that may not have the same license application and or vetting process that we would here in the U.S. So a real big concern would be when you do utilize some of these workers is making sure that they are properly equipped with the skills and knowledge to safely operate our vehicles or your farm vehicles while they're on the road. And these vehicles could range from just light trucks, so pickup trucks that we all have, to large semis that are carrying harvested crops and or equipment. And additionally, specifically with the H2A workers, these could be old school buses that are hauling these employees from their housing units to the field and back. So what we always recommend is we recommend that when you bring over these workers, that they try to get the appropriate state license in which they are going to work. So I currently reside in Mississippi. So if we're going to have H2A workers here, I would like to see them get a Mississippi state license. And reasoning for that is the knowing the vetting process that goes along with that, knowing that there is going to be a driving test associated with it. So we're going to make sure somebody can operate vehicles correctly in that sense. They're going to have to go through a written test in English so that we know that they understand our traffic laws and mainly our traffic signs. So that as they kind of get into maybe construction zones, school zones, things of that nature, they know how to properly react so that everybody is safe in those situations, be it the drivers or the other drivers or maybe any pedestrians walking around the area. Um, in some cases, specifically with our Mexican H-2A workers, they have a federally provided license, which is equivalent to our CDL, that we recommend that those workers try to get while they're back in Mexico because of the vetting process that is associated with that. We know that they're doing their due diligence to make sure these drivers are good, competent drivers when it comes to operating these vehicles. And along with that, what we ask a lot of our accounts to do is time the H-2A contracts appropriately so that when we start bringing these workers on, we have time to do some driver training with them. We can do some ride along with them. And this is specifically with our larger trucks, so our semis, our school buses, and things of that nature, given the size of those vehicles and kind of the spatial awareness you need to properly operate them in a safe manner. So we like to see them come a little bit early so that we can do those driving tests, those ride-alongs. We can do additional driver training, focusing on defensive driving as well as distracted driving. All services that my team, as well as your team, are capable of providing through our Risk Solutions Network.
Definitely a big exposure, and thank you for sharing it. That's a lot of good information. So, one of the oldest and most persistent hazards associated with farming and machinery are PTO shafts. Can you talk a little bit about what a PTO shaft is and some of the exposures and how we're helping our customers?
Sure thing. For those that aren't aware, a PTO shaft stands for power takeoff. So this is essentially the drive shaft, if you will, coming off of a tractor that would connect to an implement for a various purpose. And those implements can do a variety of tasks. And the reason that I like to bring this up is because of how often PTO shafts are used in the agricultural world for a variety of things. And so this can be for just field maintenance, harvesting purposes, irrigation as well. So this is one of those reasons why I did want to speak on this today and kind of point out a few things associated with it that I think a lot of our accounts need to be aware of and stuff that my team likes to focus on when we go out there. So first and foremost, the most of the PTO shaft accidents aren't occurring when it's fully running, when it is what, so to speak, redlining. Most accidents occur at lower speeds. All right. And the reason for this in some situations is, unfortunately, there are pieces of equipment for us to pull maintenance on or to kind of sort out any issues. Those PTO shafts have to be running for us to make those adjustments. So you're going to get a number of people on varying sides of the PTO shafts trying to work on this. And if you're wearing loose fitting clothing or jewelry, or if you have long hair that's not pulled back, there is a chance that this can get pulled into the PTO shafts, and the accidents can vary in severity, and some being very, very bad. But where we see a lot of the issues would be older equipment, because let's be honest, in the ag world, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we may have a lot of older equipment out there, and over the years, we may have damaged or lost the safety shields that come on those PTO shafts. Or they may have just been removed because as we were trying to pull maintenance on them, they got lost, or we found it was a little easier to not put them back on. Um, Also, like I had mentioned, some of those shafts have to be running while we pull maintenance, or unfortunately, um, the PTO shaft may engage when the operator wasn't aware that it was still attached or it was on. And as it's running and they turn around the corner, there it is. You're wearing a pair of loose fitting blue jeans, grabs your leg, pulls you in. And so And then additionally, kind of going back to that older equipment, we may have some defective shafts. So over time, we've hit rocks, we've hit stumps, we've hit varying things in the field that may have damaged the PTO shafts to the point that they don't run appropriately. So those are kind of some of the causes, but then some of our tips to make sure that we aren't putting ourselves in situations that we could have those types of concerns would be before we're using any equipment that has those PTO shafts, let's make sure the shields are in place. So if we've got older equipment and we've removed it, we've lost it. Look, most every farm has a shop that we can fabricate something that we can protect the employees from the PTO shaft. So we can make a cage. So let's make sure we have that in place. If we have a damaged shield that is not going to do its job fully, let's repair it to make sure it is. And then if we are having to work on a piece of equipment while that shaft is moving, let's cut down the number of employees who are going to be around the area while that's taking place and make sure there's one person responsible for it. So if they're going to be working around it, they need to be controlling the let's say the power to it. So if we do need to lock out, tag out, they're the ones responsible for it. They're going to be the ones who get to turn it back on when it's time, things of that nature. And just remember the clothing that we wear when we get around those PTO shafts. Let's make sure it's not loose. If we do have longer hair, tied up, put it in a ball cap, something of that nature. And then since a lot of our accidents occur when the PTO shafts are going at a lower speed, make sure if we're going to walk around them that those PTOs have stopped completely. Don't just think because you've already turned it off and it's starting to slow down that it's safe to get near, or heaven forbid you try to step over it. Those things need to be stopped completely before we get near them.
Yeah, it's a significant caught-in exposure if you think about it. And most people, like Brian said earlier, it won't happen to me. But also, I don't think we realize the power and strength of a motor, that it's not going to stop because you've got something caught in it. And you better be able to undress pretty quickly if you're actually caught in one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
At FCCI, risk is our business. We provide services that help business owners better understand and minimize the losses they face every day. Our experienced and credentialed professionals have worked in a wide variety of industries, including agriculture, construction, manufacturing, retail, service, and wholesale distributing. FCCI's risk control consultants meet directly with policyholders to learn the unique nature of their business, combine individual recommendations with online resources and tools to create a custom-tailored plan. Our risk control programs provide clear goals, action plans, and survey schedules to help policyholders accomplish their safety objectives. To learn more about FCCI's risk control resources, contact your agent or visit our website, www.fcci-group.com, and click on Risk Control. All the different exposures, hazards, and controls that you've talked about this morning, and you mentioned Risk Solutions Network. So I went on there while you guys were talking, and I see there's a lot of material on there relating to farm safety. I just punched in PTO, and a bulletin came up on agriculture safety matters, power takeoff, shaft safety. So there's a lot of resources on that site. I was curious, on the commercial side, depending on the size of the business that we insure, we generally see more controls, more formal operations the larger the business gets. A very large contractor is generally more sophisticated, may employ a full-time safety director, safety manager that's their job. Is it the same in the farm world, do you see large farm operations? Do they employ safety managers, or is it left to uh, managers out in the field? Do you see some of that formality with bigger farms?
It may not be one person responsible for safety, but that job is going to be the responsibility of someone, but they may have another role as well. And yes, we typically see that in some of the larger operations. I've come across some myself that are basically run as commercial operations. One in particular, I walked into their office and they had six big screen TVs on the wall, and he could pull up any piece of equipment because they had cameras on it, so he could see what the driver was doing at any given time to make sure they were operating in a safe manner. So yes, it's the larger operations tend to have a little bit more resources that they can dedicate to safety. And then some of the smaller stuff, it's all hands on deck, if you will. So everybody is involved in it. Everybody wants to be safe. Everybody wants to go home uninjured. Um, and that's where my team comes in. Like I said, a lot of us come from that background. So we know the exposures. We know somebody that may have been hurt. Um, my consultant here in Mississippi actually was working a farm when he was younger and had his arm pinched pretty bad to the point they thought he'd almost broke it while he was working on a piece of an implement. So we get it. And I like to stress that because when we're out in the field and we say, hey, look, this is concerns for us. This is stuff that keeps us up at night, and we want you to prioritize it. We're there to help. And like you mentioned with the Risk Solutions Network, we have a variety of resources that we can use as a plug and play that we can get to you. We can give you that training to address that exposure, or we can create it ourselves. And like I mentioned with the H2A workers, we also have the ability to translate a lot of that information into Spanish as well. So we're really there to help and service our accounts to make sure that they're operating in the safest way possible.
So you mentioned the sophistication of an operation where they can monitor equipment in the field from the office. That gets into our next topic where we're going to touch on equipment fires and the fire hazard associated with big machinery. Maybe here you might touch on some of the remote operations as well and how we address things like fire hazard related to equipment in general or stuff that's even operated without a human being inside.
Yeah, yeah. So equipment fires, man, that's a pet peeve of mine, if you will. Um, we it seems like every year we have a big fire associated with a combine or cotton pickers, things of that nature. And so, um, when we do our surveys, we try to schedule them seasonally, if you will, to make sure that prior to certain events, we're out there in front of our accounts to say, look, we know what's coming. We know what you're about to be doing. Here's where we see losses. Here's what we think you need to do to help prevent said losses. So when it comes to the equipment fires, the things that we really, really see is it's the daily maintenance and housekeeping that is associated with those pieces of equipment. Because we're out in those fields, we are picking up debris, we are running over items out there, and it's getting accumulated under our tractors as well as our combines and our pickers to the point that they're getting pretty close to pieces of motors and whatnot and moving parts that are generating heat. So that debris is providing fuel, if you will, to the heat source. Next thing you know, we've got a fire, and this equipment's not cheap anymore. Although it never really was cheap, it's pretty expensive at this point in time. So what we really like to see is a good clean out and kind of blow down, if you will, at the beginning of the day. Let's make sure that that piece of equipment as clean as possible moving out to the first field, to the first job that we're going to do it, and that any hoses, specifically hydraulic hoses, oil, things of that nature, those look to be in good condition. They're tight. They're not loose. We don't think we're going to pull any of them, things of that nature, and kind of spew those fluids out onto a hot engine, if you will. And then during the day, look, I know that a lot of our accounts, they get out there, they get busy. We've got to fight against weather. If we've got bad weather coming in, they want to get things done. But we really recommend taking the time, even during the day, to periodically stop, clean the equipment out again, blow it down, make sure it's okay before we move on so that we're not just basically increasing the amount of debris and providing more fuel to a hot area. And look, I'm a firm believer that things happen at times, and you've just got to be prepared for that. So even with those precautionary steps taken, we've got to make sure that if something occurs, we can fight that fire or we can at least minimize that loss. So this equipment comes with fire extinguishers. Let's make sure that it is operational. It will work properly in the event we need it. And I also recommend if we need another, look, there are services out there where we can buy more fire extinguishers. It wouldn't hurt to have more available so that if we were out there, there's more hands on deck, so to speak, fighting this fire. Additionally, there are some suppression systems that are available for this equipment through some third parties that you can put. It's kind of designed for the equipment, and you can place sensors and suppression units in varying points in the equipment so that if those sensors are tripped, the suppression system acts up or kicks in and will ultimately kind of try to mitigate or put that fire out. The so specifically with like cotton pickers, things of that nature, we do kind of push that, say, hey, this may be something you want to look into. Um, because specifically with a cotton picker, what that is harvesting and the type and the flammability that cotton lint is. And so
Are some of the larger pieces of machinery coming from the factory or the dealer with those automatic suppression systems already built in, or is that still an aftermarket bolt-on thing an owner would have to install?
so it's an add-on, if you will. So I wouldn't say it's standard equipment. But there are partnerships between some of the third parties with some of the larger equipment manufacturers like John Deere that they train their technicians that if you want one of those suppression units on there, they'll send it to the actual John Deere dealership. And as they are getting your equipment ready, they'll go ahead and install it. And John Deere also has their own suppression system that if when you're ordering your equipment, if that is something that you want, you can have that added on as an option, so to speak.
Do you
But
have
it's all
con
still good information. This, like I had mentioned, every year we seem to see some of these equipment fires, and where the suppression units may be a little bit of an extra expense in the long run, it's a wise investment.
I think Ralph would agree. We've seen large fires on construction sites with big pieces of equipment, whether it's in, excavators, large pieces that comes down to a hydraulic line or something breaking. You get a spark, now you've got fuel, you got air, you got heat, boom, you have a large fire. And prevention is so important. We stress it, but what do you do when the loss occurs? And those suppression systems, I wish everybody listening to this podcast, whether you're a farming operation or a construction operation, if you've got mobile equipment in remote places, we highly encourage you to to evaluate the idea of installing some of that automatic suppression onto your machines because it can save everyone a ton of money and downtime.
We see the same thing, and it's kind of a little pet peeve for me as well. Construction workers on our side of the table, they get so busy and it's hot. And these pieces of equipment are run, 8 to 10 hours a day. So they're very hard. So that's with the maintenance and the cleaning and all the things they're doing on the ag side. I wish we'd see more of it on the construction side. It's not that we don't, it's just that things get so busy and things happen, and it's so unfortunate. But I we had one recently, just as a short side note, and we're out in the middle of nowhere, had no way to put it out. You know what they did? They got all their excavators, just start throwing dirt on it. And I went out after the fact and was looking for this excavator. All I seen was this big mound of dirt. I couldn't find the equipment. I'm like, where was the fire? And that's how they put it out. But we total loss.
We have a segment called Hey Ralphie, and Ralph is sharing the segment with you today. So here's our Hey Ralphie segment.
Hey, Ralph, Ralphie boy!
This is Ralph.
Hey there, Ralphie boy! Ralphie boy!
Ralph? Ralph?
Hey, yeah, Ralph. How you doing there, Ralphie boy?
Hey, Ralphie boy!
All right, thank you so much. So if you're in risk control and you do what we do, regardless of construction or ag, you've probably had some experiences with some weird or funny stories that happened during our visits. So can you share one of these instances, something that happened out in the field that you're familiar with?
I will. And I love this story. And because at the time, it never really occurred to me that this could be an issue. And the ending goes back to being creative, like you said, Brian, when we try to figure out ways to help mitigate these losses. I was going out to a peanut buying point, and they were having a large amount of falling accidents from the drying wagons that the peanuts are placed in, where they're dried before they're placed into the big, large peanut warehouse before they're actually needed. So I go out there, I sit down with our contact, and I'm like, Mr. So and so, I said, walk me through this. Like, what's going on? Why does everybody seem to be falling from these wagons? And so he goes, all right, Tony. He said, do you know how we sample the peanuts to make sure moisture-wise they're where we need them before we put them in the warehouse? And I said, hey, let's act like I don't. Why don't you go ahead and tell me? He says, absolutely. Says, we go out there, we go to the trailer, we climb up the side of it on the ladder, and then we take a sample from the top. I said, okay. That's easy enough. I've climbed a ladder. I've hung Christmas lights. I haven't fallen. So walk me through this. Where's the issue? He says, Tony, when we harvest peanuts, those peanut pickers pick up everything in the field. And sometimes when you climb that ladder and you reach over to get your sample, there may be a very, very angry rattlesnake coiled up right there in front of you. So what are you going to do? And I said, I am going to release that ladder and jump off. And he goes, exactly. And I said, so that's where the losses came from? He says, every last one of them. He says, the snakes are not always alive, but sometimes they are. I said, okay. So I said, walk me through this. How are we going to prevent this? He goes, simple enough. He goes, out of season, I don't have anything in these trailers. So I went, and on the back side of them, I basically punched a hole in the side of them, built a little bracket holder so that I have a little piece of metal that I can slide in and slide out. So now every season, when I need to take a sample, I don't have to climb that ladder anymore. I don't have to deal with a possible angry rattlesnake looking me in the eye. I can just stick my probe right in through the side of the trailer, get my sample, pull it out, look at it, and move on with my day. And I applauded him. I said, that is fantastic. So that's one of those stories that I like to tell about when we do have these losses. You really got to look at the root cause what's causing them and how we can kind of fix it.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you for sharing, Tony.
Tony, that's a great story. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Look, I threw out a lot of numbers. I threw out a lot of information. You could have a podcast on each one of these topics individually. For any of the listeners out there, if they want more information, please feel free to reach out to myself or any of our other consultants. Like I said, we have a vast amount of experience on my team, all very capable individuals, and we would love to work with all of our policyholders to help them provide safer environments for their workers.
Yeah, well said, Tony.
Tony Williams, Risk Control Supervisor, FCCI Agribusiness. Thanks for being with us today.
I appreciate it. Thank y'all.
And thanks for tuning in, everybody out there. Stay safe. This is Talking Risk, the Risk Control podcast from FCCI Insurance Group. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or by visiting our website, fcci-group.com. Click on Risk Control, then Risk Control Resources, and select the episode you want to hear. For Talking Risk, I'm Brian Harris, Risk Control Director with FCCI Insurance Group. Recording copyright FCCI Services, Inc. 2022. The opinions expressed in this recording don't necessarily represent those of FCCI, its personnel, or affiliates. This recording is provided for informational purposes only, does not attempt to identify all potential hazards or remedial actions, and is not intended as legal or professional advice. FCCI, its personnel, and affiliates shall not be liable for any loss, death, damage, or expense arising out of your reliance upon this recording. You are solely responsible for complying with applicable law, including any changes in the law, and for the safety of your operations. Please consult your legal advisor with any questions or concerns.